Hello, eighth grade. Welcome to the notes for continental drift and plate tectonics. So we are going to start off with a set of notes that looks like this to get started. This is what the document looks like. It should be on paper. If you don't have a copy, you can get one on the table in the front of the room. So looking at your notes, so about 100 years ago, a man by the name of Alfred Wegener, I know it looks like Wagner, but he was from Germany, so we pronounce his last name as Wegener, proposed that all continents were once a part of a supercontinent called Pangaea. And depending on where in the world you are from, some individuals pronounce Pangaea as Pangaea. Over time, Pangaea began breaking apart and slowly moving to their positions where we know the continents to be today. So here is a picture of his proposed Pangaea, how everything was all shaped together. This should look familiar to you from our Gizmos activity. And then this is what Alfred Wegener looked like. So that gives you A and B for your notes. Moving to letter C, Wegener proposed the hypothesis of continental drift, that's letter C, which suggested that continents are in constant motion on the surface of Earth. Wegener observed similarities of continental coastlines now separated by oceans and how they could fit together like pieces of a puzzle. So similar to what we did in the activity yesterday, where you saw how South America looked like it fit together fairly well with Africa. So many of the continents look like they fit together like pieces of a puzzle. That's letter C and letter D. So Alfred Wegener had a total of 4 pieces of evidence that we're going to look at in more detail. And these will sound familiar to you from your Gizmos activity yesterday. So the first one is that puzzle-like fit of the continents. The second is climate clues and how ice and where ice could have been leaves us clues. Fossil clues from ancient creatures and rock clues. So that is letter E, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the first piece of evidence that we are going to describe in more detail, and this is going to seem familiar from your activity in the Gizmos, are fossil clues. So fossils are preserved remains of ancient plants or animals, and plants and animals that live on separate continents are unique to that continent alone. Think of a kangaroo. We only see kangaroos on Australia. So it would be very unusual and very unlikely for 2 animals to have developed and evolved exactly the same way in exactly the same conditions in 2 opposite ends of the world without having any sort of connection with each other. Fossils or similar organisms have been found on several continents separated by oceans. So we have the example of Glossoropterus. Glossoropterus is a plant that has been found on several different continents separated by oceans. Glossoropterus is a plant. So how did it get from Africa to Antarctica to India? Without the idea that at one point in time, those areas must have been connected at some point in time. So here, the orange area shows fossils where Glossoropterus has been found. So you can see that includes South America, Africa, India, Antarctica, and Australia. This is another similar map. The shiny green parts are also places where Glossoropterus has been found. So we have fossil evidence that Glossoropterus lived in wet, warm climates based upon the types of leaves that it has. And yet Glossoropterus lived in what is currently now really cold environments. We find Glossoropterus in the middle of Antarctica. That is not very tropical. So this idea is that at one point in time, not only were these continents all together for Glossoropterus to have left fossils behind on all these different continents, but these continents probably were at a warmer place than they are today. Deposits of fossilized plants in Antarctica are evidence of continental drift. Fossilized plants in these deposits show that Antarctica was once near the equator. So that should complete your fossil clue notes there, A, B, 1, and 2. Some other ideas here that are not in the notes, but we talked about in the gizmos, is Mesosaurus and Cynogenathus, those two animals that lived, both in South America and Africa. They probably couldn't swim across the Atlantic Ocean because they weren't really ocean treading animals. And so how could they have gotten from South America to Africa? The idea is that South America and Africa were probably at one time connected. So moving on to number 3, climate clues. Wegener suggested that a large sheet of ice covered the continents. Today, all these continents except one are very near the equator, where the climate is warm enough to melt the ice sheets, and glaciers would not have been able to make it that close to the equator. Wegener studied the sediments left behind, the glacial grooves or striations that formed when the ice sheets melted and Pangea spread apart. This provided climate evidence for Wegener's hypothesis or his theory. So letter A, you're looking for equator. Letter B, Wegener suggested that these large sheets of ice letter A is the equator. Letter B is ice. Wegener suggested that the large sheets of ice covered the continents. Today, all of these continents except one are near to the letter C is equator, where the climate was warm enough to melt the ice sheets. Letter D, Wegener studied the sediments left behind and the glacial grooves, that is letter D, that form when the ice sheets melted and Pangea spread apart. And so this gave additional evidence, additional climate evidence to help to support his idea. So to look in that a little bit deeper, you can see here, similar to what we saw in the gizmos, how we have the white represents that glacial striations, that glacier ice sheet evidence. You can see that it's in India, Australia, Africa, South America, and Antarctica. Everything except Antarctica is probably too warm right now to really have been impacted significantly by these glacier ice sheets. And so the idea is that when all of the continents were connected, everything would have been a lot more south than it is today. And so that whole area where the glacier ice sheets were probably was similar to our South Pole today. Moving on to Roman numeral number 4, rock and geology clues. So geology is the study of the earth. So in these clues, we're going to look at mountains and rocks and that type of evidence. So I have a couple different pieces of evidence here for you. Moving into letter A, Wegener observed the mountain ranges and rock formations on different continents had common origins, providing rock evidence for continental drift. Even when the same volcano erupts, every time that volcano erupts, the igneous rock that it leaves behind are going to be a little bit different. So each instance is going to make unique rocks to the event that happens. So when mountain ranges form because rocks are crashing together, or igneous rocks form because a volcanic eruption has happened, every time those happen, the rocks that are created are unique. So letter A is mountain ranges, and letter B is volcanic rock. So our first piece of evidence here is volcanic rock that is identical in chemistry and age has been found on the western coast of Africa and the eastern coast of South America. In order for a volcano to have hit both of those coastlines with the Atlantic Ocean as big as it is now, then we would see that volcanic evidence on way more than just these coastlines of South America and Africa. And we would also see the evidence on the ocean floor, and we don't. So this gives us evidence that at one point in time, South America and Africa were close together. This next one is similar to what we saw in the gizmos. This is the Slanodian mountain range in Northern Europe, and the Appalachian mountain range in Eastern North America are similar in age, structure, and rock type. So the idea is that at one point in time, North America and Europe were connected, and this made one very long mountain range. So if you push North America and Europe together again, these mountain ranges appear to line up as to one long mountain range made of the same type and same age of rocks. So this slide helps you with C and the number 1 underneath letter C. So in review, you have 4 different kinds of evidence, and this should all seem similar to what we did in our gizmos. The puzzle-like fit of the continents, climate evidence, fossil clues, and rock clues. So 4 pieces of evidence there to support Wegener's theory. But there was something missing. Wegener's idea was not widely accepted. He was made fun of. He was not accepted or trusted amongst the scientific community until nearly 4 decades after his initial hypothesis was shared. The reason why scientists didn't really accept his ideas was that they couldn't figure out how the continents would have moved. They could see, just like you see now, that all of these pieces of evidence make sense. But what they were missing was, how did the continents move? What was the mechanism? What was the motion? What was the motor that was causing this to happen? So because continental drift is a very slow process, it's very difficult to measure how fast the continents are moving and what is moving them. So because scientists couldn't understand how the continents could push their way through the solid rock of the mantle and the sea floor, they didn't really accept Wegener for his ideas in continental drift. So this is letter A, B, and C under what's missing. So Wegener could not explain the process that caused the continents to move. Additional scientific evidence to prove Wegener's hypothesis was existing on the ocean floor, but at the time we didn't have the technology and the ability to see that evidence. Remember, Alfred Wegener was making these discoveries in the early 1900s. So the evidence to prove continental drift wasn't discovered, unfortunately, until after Wegener's death. And Wegener's death is discussed in the Edpuzzle video that you can watch for homework. He died trying to discover and learn more about his research in Greenland, and he died of exposure. And so what that means is he basically froze to death. So not a great way to go, but at least he was dying doing something that he enjoyed and loved, researching and exploring.